Will Smith, What Is He? Part 7. We continue with the analysis to determine what Will Smith is with the GQ interview. The topic now turns on to the question of writing his memoir. I felt like a combination of having completed some phase of my life, and also with my father dying. I just never would have been able to say this stuff about my father beating up my mother. Smith explained, I never would have been able to talk about that while he was alive. The fact of him not being able to talk about it whilst his father was alive suggests, of course, that he remained fearful of his father, and that wouldn't be the entitled behaviour necessarily of somebody who's a narcissist that would just speak out irrespective. Indeed, one would be more likely to expect that a narcissist would completely talk about what had happened during their childhood and the behaviours of their father as a means, potentially, as a pity play, to, first of all, smear that individual to assert control over them indirectly by talking about their behaviour, and also then asserting control over the listener by way of pity play. I had a troubled childhood. Poor me, pity me. The book writing process was difficult in part because Smith wanted to be cautious about the places where telling his own story intersected with telling the stories of others. When the first draft of the manuscript was finished, he convened the people who were mentioned most prominently, primarily family and long-time friends, in Miami. I read everything I was saying about them, Smith told me. I had to get 25 people to come to Miami and hear what I'm saying because I know people are going to have to live with it forever. Is this a demonstration of considerable emotional empathy by getting those people together first to allow them to hear from him directly what he was saying about them and in relation to them? Or is this grandiosity? Come listen to me while I talk about my life. Come and have control asserted over you as I thrust in your face precisely my views about you. The meeting was the first time Will had ever spoken with his mother about the times his father hit her. It was literally the first time we ever discussed it, Smith explained. She had never heard my perception of what happened, so it was really cathartic in a way. It went great, but it was a brutal couple of weeks, man. It was brutal. The book fills in the details of Smith's younger years, how he went from making high school raps in his friend DJ Jazzy Jeff's basement to the duo becoming the first hip-hop artist to win a Grammy, how he blew his money on cars and girlfriends before borrowing a few grand from a local drug dealer to pay for his move to Los Angeles, a sense of entitlement, potentially, where he ended up auditioning for the starring role in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air at a party at Quincy Jones's house, how he lashed out at his first love after she had an affair. Is that a threat to control, or is it the diminution of emotional empathy as a consequence of an external factor, an external stressor? How his first marriage to Cherise Zampino ended under the weight of his growing ambition, with divorce papers delivered on Valentine's Day, and how his jealousy of Tupac Shakur, a close childhood friend of his second wife, Jada, prevented him from ever speaking to the legendary rapper before his death. More about that later. Most clearly, though, the book provides a detailed accounting of Smith's deliberate effort to become the biggest movie star in the world. I wanted to do what Eddie Murphy was doing. I wanted to make people feel how I felt the first time I saw Star Wars, Smith writes. Grandiosity, sense of entitlement, or is that a case of emotional empathy saying, I was excited when I saw Star Wars, I want you to feel the same way. I wanted to be Eddie Murphy in Star Wars. The pursuit began with one of his first roles in 1993's 6 Degrees of Separation. For rapper turned actor, it was a bold project. A cerebral play made into a film based on a true story, in which Smith's young gay con artist fools a series of high society New Yorkers into providing him shelter by convincing him he's the son of Sidney Poitier. One of those New Yorkers was played by Stockard Channing, whom Smith has admitted to falling in love with as a result of staying in character throughout filming, a technique, he writes, that he won't use again. The fact that he fell in love with that individual whilst married to somebody else does show an absence of emotional empathy for his wife. The fact, however, that is it the case that he is blame-shifting by pointing to the method acting as the cause of why he did this? Or is it a genuine reason, and having realised the problems that it caused for him, he responded appropriately by adjusting his behaviours rather than talking about it and therefore not using the technique again. That's very lovely to hear, Channing told the interviewer with a flattered laugh. We liked each other and trusted each other. That's actually quite rare. She explained that everything was easy from the first time we met each other. He didn't have a lot of the neurotic stuff that most of us have. That tends to suggest that there's a lack of self-absorption on the part of Will Smith. After the hugely popular Men in Black and Bad Boys sequels, Smith branched out into the apocalyptic sci-fi with I, Robot, starring Bridget Moynahan. In the film's most intimate scene, Moynahan learns for the first time that Smith's character is part robot by methodically inspecting his arm and chest. I could never get through the take. After the third rib, he would start giggling like a little girl, she recalled. That's his charm. Again, it doesn't demonstrate that he's such a level of self-absorption. A few years later, when Moynihan's relationship with Tom Brady ended, only for her to soon learn that she was pregnant with their child, prompting a tabloid frenzy, Smith reached out to his former co-star. He was the first person to pick up the phone and say, "Come over, let's talk," Moynihan told me. And for somebody like that to make room in his life was impressive. I'm sure I'm not unique. He's that person. That tends to suggest the presence of emotional empathy. He didn't need to do it. Moynihan's nowhere near as famous as he is. He could have easily dispatched a minion, sent off a fruit hamper, sent some words down the telephone, but instead he made time to contact her and invite her to come and stay with him. It could be cognitive empathy, of course, but there is the suggestion that may well be emotional empathy. That's what my life is for, Smith explained to the interviewer a few days after the interviewer spoke with Moynihan. Both of his parents, as well as his grandmother, have been the kind of people who you called in a time of crisis, and so it's a role he's eager to play for others. That was the thing, even with Tom Cruise. Tom and I became friends in the middle of his public difficulties. That's when I want to be there. If everything's great, call somebody else. Call me when you need help. I love it. I love being the 2 a.m. emergency phone call. Is this the cognitive empathy of a mid-range narcissist that loves the drama and wants to be involved in it with the fake white knight syndrome? Or is this an individual who has that genuine emotional empathy that puts himself out with that 2 a.m. emergency phone call and wants to genuinely help other people? Smith set out on a journey to find himself and find happiness. He rented a house in Utah and sat in solitude for 14 days. If that is accurate, a narcissist would find that very hard to do. He travelled to Peru for more than a dozen rituals, even though he'd never even smoked weed and barely drank. This was my first tiny taste of freedom, Smith writes of his first experience. In my 50-plus years on this planet, this is the unparalleled greatest feeling I've ever had. He opened a stand-up show for Dave Chappelle. He began travelling without security for the first time, showing up in foreign countries and working his way through the airport crowds unaccompanied. I totally opened myself up to what I think was a fresh sampling of the fruits of the human experience, Smith told me. This does show an absence of grandiosity in engaging in such behaviours. During his first meeting with Michaela Boehm, an intimacy coach he spent years working with, Smith confessed that if he could have anything in the world, he'd want a harem of girlfriends. Grandiosity, sense of entitlement. Who? She demanded, insisting he named specific women he'd want to invite to his harem. Misty Copeland, Smith replied, and Hale Berry, too. For the rest of the session, the two of them researched specific women who could round out his aspirational harem. The plan was to then begin contacting the women. I don't know where I saw it, or some shit as a teenager, but the idea of travelling with 20 women that I loved and took care of and all of that, it seemed like a really great idea, Smith explained to the interviewer with a laugh. And then after we played it out a little bit, I was like, that would be horrific. That would be horrific. I was like, can you imagine how miserable? That shows potentially that the fantasy that would be accompanied by the idea of having harem, that when he actually looks into it, he has the grounding realization that it's not a very good idea at all. He explains that what the intimacy coach was doing was essentially cleaning out his mind, letting it know it was okay to be me and be who I was. It was okay to think, Hale is fine. It doesn't make me a bad person that I'm married, and I think that Hale Berry is beautiful. Whereas in my mind, in my Christian upbringing, even my thoughts were sins. That was really the process that Michaela worked me through, to let me realise that my thoughts were not sins, and even acting on an impure thought didn't make me a piece of shit. Is this somebody engaging in the self-aggrandizement of, I found myself? Or is this an individual who is engaged in the self-flagellation of the empath, who finds himself pinned back by those earlier experiences and his belief that certain activities he just must not do? Smith's relatively late career embrace of social media is another storytelling experiment. He's become one of the internet's buzziest celebrities, offering fans and followers a glimpse of him on set, embracing weird memes and shooting TikToks and video clips specifically engineered to go viral. That was one of the things I learned with James Avery on Fresh Prince. James made it very clear. You are not a famous rapper here, Smith recalled. If you want to be successful, you better humble yourself to this craft. I never forgot that idea. When you start something new, humble yourself to the craft. He started studying Lisa Koshy, who'd leveraged her success on Vine and YouTube into acting roles, and who advised Smith to stop trying to be so perfect. Social media thrives on the perception of authenticity. It was fine if he flubbed a line or his lighting wasn't perfect in a TikTok. Smith started shooting some of his videos on his iPhone as opposed to professional camera equipment. He took cues from Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart, who impressed him with the way they'd share behind-the-scene moments from their movie shoots, something that would have been unthinkable in the Hollywood that Smith had come up in. They were doing unheard-of stuff, posting pictures from set. You can't post pictures from set a year before the movie comes out. Oh shit, yes you can, Smith recalled thinking. And again, this demonstrates an individual which seems to have a rather rigid adherence to the do's and don'ts, that he's been conditioned, it would appear, to behave in a particular way, notwithstanding his considerable talent, charisma, popularity and wealth, that he has to follow the rules. Smith's foray into social media also comes at a time when he and Jada have become Hollywood's most transparent and vulnerable couple. Red Table Talk, the Facebook show hosted by Pinkett Smith, is the closest thing the digital age has to the role Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil once played on broadcast television. A place for difficult, messy conversations about love, sex, drugs and everything else, often featuring their daughter Willow and Jada's mother Adrienne Banfield Norris. Smith himself has appeared on the show, most notably for a frank discussion with Jada about a period of non-monogamy in their marriage. The pursuit of truth is the only way to be happy in this lifetime, Smith told the interviewer, and we sort of came to the agreement that authenticity was the release from the shackles of fame and public scrutiny. When you tell the truth, the pair reasoned, you never have to fear being found out. Of course, it can be seen in that particular episode that's being referred to that there was a very direct, devil-may-care, in-your-face, brusque and uncaring recollection from Jada Pinkett Smith, of course, commensurate with what we understand her to be, as per the examination of her. Whereas Smith sat there looking like a punch-drunk boxer, defeated, exhausted, whereas she was very much in control. Again, it showed that he was on the receiving end, that he was the one that was being done to, and that he was not the controller. That militates against how a narcissist would certainly respond in such circumstances, probably arguing back rather than being accommodating in order to deal with the threat to control, and ultimately perhaps even storming off. Returning to the GQ interview, the interviewer explains that he was one of the first people that Smith had spoken to, or at least one of the only ones who didn't work for him, who'd read the draft of his book manuscript. And Smith wanted to know what I thought. The interviewer explains, I told him the truth, I'd enjoyed it, but I'd wonder about how he decided which details of his marriage to include and which to leave out. Throughout the draft that the interviewer had read, Smith had dropped in foreshadowing tidbits about matrimonial acrimony. Jada, her husband writes, hadn't wanted a traditional wedding ceremony, but gave in to his pressure. His assertion of control over her? This would be the first of many compromises Jada would make over the years that painfully negated her own values, Smith explained. Is that the case? Or was it more that she was allowing Smith to believe that this was the case in order to control him? Years later, Smith persuaded her to move into a massive 256-acre compound that she was dead set against purchasing. Nothing good comes from spending your hard-earned money on a family home that your wife doesn't want, Smith writes. Now, many people would be delighted to live in a 256-acre compound. Some people say, not for me. But would they make their other half's life a misery, the passive aggressiveness of the mid-range narcissist becomes evident in terms of going along with it, but then keep bringing it up against the individual, complaining about the fact that that's where they live. And the comment, "nothing good comes from spending your hard-earned money on a family home that your wife doesn't want," tells you everything about how Smith was treated thereafter. You are putting a down payment on discord, and for years you were paying off a mortgage of misery, or worse. It's clear how badly treated he was as a consequence of her needing to assert control over him by bringing up the past repeatedly about where they lived and essentially throwing it at his face, no doubt in a multiplicity of devaluing ways. The harsh reality for those who love a dreamer is that everything comes second to the dream. As Smith's stardom grew, his wife would wake up many mornings in tears, his stardom being a threat to control, and she was responding with pity plays, making him feel guilty. At one point, she turned down an opportunity for her band to open for Guns N' Roses so that Smith could continue shooting The Pursuit of Happiness. Jada never believed in conventional marriage. Jada had family members that had an unconventional relationship, so she grew up in a way that was very different than how I grew up. There were significant, endless discussions about what is relational perfection. Most people, of course, just get on with it, rather than endlessly debating what the nature of their relationship should be. And of course, the word salads that we've seen Jada Pinkett Smith come out with demonstrate the way that she would seek to assert control over Smith by talking about what is relational perfection. The clear impression that's gained from the dynamic between the two is that, in effect, Jada Pinkett Smith is the penis thrusting forward, and Will Smith finds himself as the balls being dragged behind wherever the penis wants to go. She wants to talk about relational perfection, he has to do so. She doesn't like living where they are, he has to put up with the tantrums, the accusations. She wants to see other people, he has to live with it. We have given each other trust and freedom, with the belief that everybody has to find their own way, and marriage for us can't be a prison. And I don't suggest our road for anybody. I don't suggest this road for anybody, but the experiences of the freedoms that we've given one another, and the unconditional support to me, is the highest definition of love. In July 2020, following public revelations of what Jada would describe as an entanglement, see parts passing with regard to her as to explanations about why she said that, with the R&B singer August Alsina, a tabloid frenzy ensued, and Will and Jada took themselves to the red table for a 12-minute discussion of the dynamics of their relationship. This did not necessarily clear things up. The public has a narrative that is impenetrable, Smith said. Once the public decides something, it's difficult to impossible to dislodge the pictures and ideas and perceptions. Because the impetus for the red table talk was Alsina's disclosures, a viewer could have walked away thinking that Jada was the only one engaging in other sexual relationships, when that was not. Smith delicately explained to me, in fact, the case. Or take one of the memes spawned by their discussion, a screenshot of Smith looking stern-faced and droopy-eyed. It was midnight and we were going on vacation the next day, Smith explained, noting that the details they were discussing were by that point years in the past. Bringing up the past. It was like, no, guys, I'm not sad, I'm fucking exhausted. And indeed, why is he exhausted? He's exhausted as a consequence of the behaviours that he's being subjected to, but also the fact that he hasn't walked away from it, that he hasn't given up, that he continues to engage, showing that slavish devotion again to try and placate and please the narcissist of his wife. The interviewer explains that after reading work that he's done to break his addiction to affirmation, to free himself of the need to please, it was hard not to be proud of him for sticking to a boundary. It may seem hard to believe, but I would lose sleep over not giving you the answer that I know you could use, Smith told me. Classic self-flagellation and the desire to please. I want to help you. I want you to succeed. I want you to have a headline. But by the same token, I don't want to deal with the backlash of that in the world. To say I don't want to talk about that 3 years ago would have been fucking excruciating for me. For decades, Will Smith has been gracious to every interviewer. He gives you 90 minutes after agreeing to an hour. Poor assertion of boundaries, emotional empathy for allowing someone to talk for longer, self-flagellation by giving up time. And then when he's done, he walks outside to take photos with every fan, smiling for each and every one. Possible assertion of control and facade management, or again, potential emotional empathy for giving the fans more of his time. But Will, the real Will, not the character who's been playing for our benefit, he now gets to say no to the 100th selfie of the day. He gets to keep some things private, even when he knows your story will be better with just a few more details. Those excerpts from the GQ interview, of course, touch on matters that we've dealt with previously, but it enables us to understand more about his mindset and shows that there is, through this core of his behaviours, that need to please people, but that he appears now to be working on it to an extent. It's clear that it remains very much intact with regard to placating and appeasing his wife. It shows that he has that mentality whereby he appears to find validation in doing things for other people, not to make him look good, but rather this self-flagellating need to please those around him. The evidence is taking us in a particular direction, but there is yet more to examine. And therefore, join me in part 8 as we go through a selection of different aspects of Will Smith's life, a rapid run-through of them, which throws up some more interesting questions and insights.